and stand in memory of men who fought and died. They gave their life in Normandy. Remember them with pride. Soldiers, airmen, sailors, airborne and marines, whose civvies' life were tailors and men who worked machines. British and Canadian and men from USA, forces from the Commonwealth, they were all there that day. To Juneau, Sword and Utah, beaches of renown, also Gold and Omaha, that's where the ramps went down. The battle raged in Normandy, many lives were lost. The war must end in victory, and this must be the cost. When my life is over and I reach the other side, I'll meet my friends from Normandy and shake their hands with pride.
A poem by Juneau veteran Cyril Crane. 80 years ago, on D-Day the 6th of June 1944, the Solent was awash with ships, large and small, getting ready for what was codenamed Operation Neptune, a full invasion by the Allies and involving all the services. One of those on duty in the thick of it was paddle steamer Sandown. She was taken up from trade and commissioned into the Royal Navy in 1939, along with other paddle steamers that prior to World War II were being used to ferry passengers to and from the Isle of Wight. But our story doesn't just start on D-Day. Instead, it starts way back in 1916.
There have been 3 ships named Sandown over the years. The first of these was laid down at Dunlop, Bremner and Company in Glasgow and launched on the 6th of June 1916. HMS Sandown was one of 32 ascot paddle minesweepers for the Royal Navy. They were manufactured in 2 groups. Group 1, the ascot class, featured 24 ships. This included the Sandown. Group 2, the improved ascot class, had 8 ships and was completed in 1918. HMS Sandown was just under 255 feet in length with a top speed of 15 knots and was armed with 2 QF 12-pounder naval guns, with a complement of between 50 and 52 men. During World War I, 5 of the ships were lost. The first of these was the Ludlow, which struck a mine off the Suffolk coast in 1916. In 1917, both Kempton and Redcar hit mines off Calais, while Ascot was struck by a torpedo off the Farne Islands in 1918. Plumpton hit a mine off Ostend in the same year. HMS Sandown survived the Great War and was sold for scrap in March 1922. The second vessel, named Sandown, was a passenger ferry built for the Southern Railway in 1934. The ship was built by William Denny and Brothers in Dumbarton and launched on the 1st of May 1934 by Lillian Adelane, the wife of Southern Railway's General Manager Sir Eustace James Missenden, OBE, at the Southern Railway Company docks in Southampton. The ship cost £39,850. She had a length of 216 feet, a speed of 14.5 knots and a capacity for 900 passengers. Sandown was one of 2 ships ordered by the Southern Railway Company, the other being paddle steamer Ryde. Both were deployed on the Portsmouth to Ryde service. When war broke out, 7 paddle steamers sailed between Portsmouth and Ryde Pier. 4 of them were requisitioned by the government and converted into minesweepers and stationed on the east coast of England and in the Thames estuary, while another 2 played their part as civilian ships crewed by Royal Navy sailors. On the 27th of May 1940, the now renamed HMS Sandown, with the pennant number J20, became part of the flotilla for Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Dunkirk.
Out from the hell that is Dunkirk, back from the steel thrust of the German war machine comes the BEF. They're worn out and footsore, they're hungry. For weeks they have been shelled and bombed from 3 sides. They had to stagger back to the sea to survive. They were betrayed, but never defeated or dispirited. Round these men there hangs an atmosphere of glory. They're still in formation, they're still grinning. past the dust and oil on their faces. For what has been done in the past few days, the BEF is grateful to the Royal Navy for hanging a screen of fire around the Belgian beaches while the men were embarking. Here our cameras are off Dunkirk. Here the BEF is grateful too to the men of the merchant service, in the big transports and the tiny boats ploughing between the big ships and the shore.
It was codenamed Operation Dynamo. We all know it as the Dunkirk evacuation. In May 1940, the British Expeditionary Force had been beaten back by far superior forces. This was the Nazi war machine that had honed its craft in the Spanish Civil War with its lightning blitzkrieg war, and the pride of the British Army had been pushed back into a pocket around Calais and Dunkirk, and the troops in Calais were instructed to fight a rearguard action and to fight to the last. At one stage we were in danger of losing the entire British and French armies, with over 300,000 men trapped. Inexplicably, the advancing German forces ceased, giving a breathing force for the Royal Navy and the famous group of little ships to mount continued rescue operations, the majority of the troops being recovered from the mole in Dunkirk to be brought back in continually transferring ships. However, they left behind everything. Yes, we got the troops back, but in a lot of cases they'd left even their boots behind. The men were tired, beaten, exhausted, the morale was at an absolute low, but at least they were safe. But we'd left behind all of our field guns, over 56,000. We left 500,000 tons of ammunition and fuel, guns, and we were a defeated force. The Nazi war machine now controlled France, we now controlled Europe, and Britain stood alone.
During the evacuation, Margate was an obvious choice to receive both small and large vessels of the evacuation fleet, given its proximity to Dunkirk and the town's well-developed infrastructure. The long pier with its established docking facilities, its hospitals and mainline railway station, relatively close to the harbour, made it a logical choice to relieve the pressure on the port of Dover. The first ship to arrive on the 28th of May was the paddle steamer Sandown, which brought 201 troops, followed shortly by the Gracie Fields, a Southampton, Isle of Wight and South of England Railway Mail Steam Packet Company steamer. Today the company is better known as Red Funnel. Sandown disembarked 281 men before returning to Dunkirk. Sadly, on her return, she was hit by a bomb. Nearby HMS Pangbourne rescued her crew before she floundered on the 30th of May. During her time as part of Operation Dynamo, HMS Sandown rescued a total of 1,861 men, which included, on the 1st of June, a drifter, the Golden Girl, that was full of troops who got into difficulty while in the Straits of Dover off Goodwin Sands.
After Dunkirk, a German invasion of the British mainland looked imminent. In fact, military leaders even thought that the Nazis might invade the Isle of Wight as a stepping stone into the rest of the United Kingdom. The government reacted by restricting ordinary civilian travel to and from the island and banning it completely in 1943.
In 1941, HMS Sandown became the target of 22 German dive bombers. But they failed to hit her, despite dropping more than 100 bombs. The crew of HMS Southsea successfully shot down a German plane, but the ship was badly damaged by a mine off the River Tyne, and a year later was written off. There was tragedy at home when PS Portsdown hit a mine near Spitbank Fort. Deckhand Sam Jupe had a lucky escape. Although he was thrown into the water by the blast, he swam back to the ship, climbed on board, and helped rescue crew and passengers. In August, a lone German fighter plane machine-gunned the MV Lymington on her way back to Yarmouth. Deckhand G. Stickley rushed to man the Lewis gun installed on board. He fired back and the German pilot called off the attack. The rating was praised by the company for his bravery. After Dunkirk, Sandown became part of the 7th Minesweeping Flotilla based in Rosyth until March 1942, when she was converted into an anti-aircraft warship used for the protection of the coastal convoys, later becoming part of the Nor Command Humber area based in Grimsby. Sandown then moved to Immingham before a next stop, Harwich, towards the end of 1943. In June 1944, while based in Portsmouth, alongside her sister ship Ride, she took part in Operation Neptune, better known as D-Day, in which the ships served as control vessels helping with Mulberry Harbours in the Western Task Force area of the Gold and Omaha beaches. Apart from the harbours, pontoons and Bailey bridges were also used. Some of these were built on the island. Speaking in 2020, the late Peggy Forward remembers working on these.
When the Second World War started, as a teenager, I joined the Ranelagh Yacht Yard as a carpenter's mate. We were making pontoons for Bailey bridges. They were put to good use in France. I started at the old cream factory in Skewbridge Lake. After a while, I was sent to Los Altos factory at the old indoor tennis courts, now called Broadway Park Estate. I was to be a decker. There was one man and two women working on each pontoon. I used to carry great lengths of plywood and use big electric drills, and there was always people getting electric shocks.
As D-Day approached, the waters around Sandown Bay became awash with ships, as shown in this picture, described by the late Sir John Thornycroft to artist Bernard Gribble. Speaking in 2020, Cyril Daish also remembers these days.
Something from actual D-Day. Matter of fact, it was about 4 or 5 days before D-Day, and went down just to have a look at the bay, which we did, because we couldn't get down there at all, and saw these ships right from Culver to Nose Point, and some of them were marvellous kind of wars, great big wars. We learnt later it was harbours. Don't know what kind of harbours they were, I've been forgotten. We knew about 4 or 5 days before, and we were told to keep our mouths shut because something was going on. Of course, we knew that in a few days it was going to be D-Day, and that was on the, I think it was going to be on the Monday or something. Instead of that, it was on the Tuesday, and because somebody said the weather forecast wasn't very good. And that saved I think it saved a lot of the actual forces' lives, because when they went there, it was a lovely day, but the day before was terribly rough.
The D-Day operation of June the 6th, 1944 was the largest amphibious invasion in military history. Known as Operation Overlord, it brought together the Army, the Navy, the Air Force of all the Allied nations to mount an ambitious and risky invasion of Northern Europe. But it was evident that the only way that the Nazi war machine was ever going to be beaten was we had to put young men on the beaches of Normandy. The initial plan, the obvious plan, was to attack across the Pas-de-Calais of 21 miles, but through a huge program of deception, the Allied forces managed to convince the Germans that Pas-de-Calais was the intended attack area, but in reality we were going to Normandy, over 85 miles to attack 5 beaches: Gold, Sword, Juno, Utah and Omaha. Names now that will live in military history forever, but it was a close run thing. If you'd been sat here on the Isle of Wight in the more early hours, overhead was black with aircraft. The sea and the Solent here was solid with landing craft, all heading out to an area about 80 miles south of the Isle of Wight, known as Piccadilly Circus, and then the Armada would hit the beaches. The Germans were ready. Under the famous German General Rommel, they'd been installing the Atlantic Wall since 1940 because they knew the invasion was coming. So the troops that hit the beaches would be faced with machine gun nests, artillery, mines. barbed wire, and all manner of defences to rip the bottom out of boats. And in one or two of the beaches, including Omaha, where the ambitious plan was to scale the cliffs. Indeed, a lot of training was done here at Culver Cliff in the Isle of Wight. The Americans met incredible resistance and took huge casualties. The D-Day invasion force consisted of 7,000 ships and over 190,000 naval personnel. And in the early hours of June the 6th, 1944, we will put 133,000 young men onto the beaches of Normandy. Today, it's almost incredible to understand what they went through. And of course, the biggest concern was the weather. The heads of staff, the weather meteorologists saw a limited window that D-Day could take forward, and the soldiers had all been sat on the landing craft, violently ill, terrified of what was to come for nearly 24 hours. So Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, made the decision to go. Today, I think it ranks as one of the bravest decisions. And there was always a risk with D-Day. The risk was that if we hit the beaches and were pushed back into the sea and had to come home, that was when this country was at the greatest risk of invasion, probably even more so than May and June of 1940. It was, without doubt, the turning point in the World War, and it was without doubt the turning point in the history of the world.
Somebody else who remembers D-Day was Robert Young. Speaking in 2018, he remembered his brother who took part in the landings in Normandy before advancing towards Germany.
My brother, who was 19 years older than me, and he worked in the family business, and he got, like many others, called up at 18 to fight in the last war. The day he had to go, he actually broke his thumb on my father's gear stick going to the boat and couldn't go, and by the next morning the red caps were on the door wanting to know why he actually hadn't got to his training. So eventually went, and he was a D-Day Troop +1, and he fought as a frontline troop all the way through Europe. But the beach that he went up, they got shot to pieces, and when he got to the beachhead, there was only 3 of his lot left. They'd lost the officers and everything. And I remember him telling me that at Arnhem Bridge, as he crossed the bridge, there was a fellow Shanklin chap, Wally Brooks. He was marching in the opposite direction off the bridge, but he said we couldn't talk to one another, we just didn't acknowledge one another. Really unfortunately for him, but fortunate for the people that were there. He was the first troops into Balsam's concentration camp, which did have an effect on him.
After HMS Rye's return, she was anchored off Bembridge to help protect Portsmouth Harbour from V-1 flying bombs. In July 1945, she returned to her original status of PS Ride to continue ferrying passengers across the Solent. As for Sandown, her war duty had not finished. After D-Day, she was due to be returned to Southern Railway, but she remained in military service until September 1945. After D-Day, she was used as an accommodation for harbour service personnel in Holland during the Battle of the Scheldt. In September 1945, she left her HMS behind and once again started working as PS Sandown until she was scrapped in 1966. In 1988, the Royal Navy ordered 15 mine hunters, built primarily by Vosper Thornycroft. The first of these, HMS Sandown, pennant number M101, was launched on the 16th of April 1988 by Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Gloucester. As Sandown was the first built, all 12 ships became known as the Sandown class of mine hunters. These ships were designed to be relatively small and manoeuvrable, able to operate close to shorelines or in shallow waters where larger vessels might have difficulty. They were equipped with various technologies to detect and neutralize mines, including sonar systems for detecting underwater objects, and the Sea Fox mine disposal system, which is a remotely operated underwater vehicle. Since her launch, she participated in a number of operations in support of the British fleet. This included being part of a NATO-led operation that was to clear the Adriatic of bombs jettisoned during the Kosovo campaign. Together, Sandown and HMS Atherstone accounted for about 20% of the 93 bombs and missiles that were located and destroyed.
Which then comes into what we call a one shaft, onto a one wheel, which then comes with the rotor casing underneath here. And then these two things here are called an actuator. This is a latitudinal, this is a longitudinal.
On the 16th of January 2000, Sandown located the wreck of the sunken scallop dredger, the Solway Harvester, which had sunk off the coast of the Isle of Man in heavy seas on the 11th of January 2000, with the loss of all 7 crew members. Following her salvage, the damaged ship was taken to Douglas before being dismantled for scrap. In July 2000, Sandown was deployed to the Mediterranean to take part in the Argonaut 02 exercises, which lasted until Christmas. She was also deployed as part of Operation Telic to clear mines in the Persian Gulf and sweep passages into Iraqi ports. Throughout her service, HMS Sandown also visited the Red Sea, Gibraltar, the Suez Canal and Dubai.
But it was in 1996 that one of Sandown's proudest moments came. On Saturday the 13th of July, she and her crew received the freedom of the town of Sandown on the Isle of Wight. Even though the ship and the class are named after the island town, HMS Sandown also carries the crest of the Sandown Park Racecourse in Surrey.
The event took over a year to organise and was led by Sandown Mayor, Councillor June Morlock. The special guest for this day was to be again Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Gloucester, who was patron of HMS Sandown. The ship had arrived in the bay 2 days earlier, and this gave a lucky few the opportunity to visit her, which didn't quite go to plan, as the launch boat broke down and they had to try to board her from a dinghy. The day of the 13th started at 10:45, with the proclamation read by the town clerk, Heather Humby, followed by the proclamation being handed to Lieutenant Commander Michael Petheram. Accompanied by the band of the Royal Lancers, members of the crew of Sandown exercised their rights as holders of the freedom of Sandown by marching bayonets fixed. They were joined by members of the Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service and the Reigate-based Sea Scouts.
Fire!
The afternoon started at the Broadway Centre, which featured a barbecue in the grounds and a game of pétanque, followed by a special civic reception attended by 140 guests. Both the Duchess of Gloucester and Lieutenant Commander Petheram visited pupils at Sandown Middle School. The Duchess was presented with flowers by 19-month-old Charlotte Laidler, but sadly this was too much for the youngster, so the flowers were presented by her grandmother, Carol. Lieutenant Commander Petheram told the pupils about his life at sea, with one lucky girl, Sarah Wright, got to wear his cap and blow his whistle. The full day of events also included a coach trip around the island for the crew and a charity football match between Sandown and the ship's personnel. In the early 2000s, the Admiralty made the decision to decommission 3 of the Sandown-class ships. HMS Sandown was one of them. So on the 19th of October 2004, the decommissioning took place. In attendance was her patron, the Duchess of Gloucester. 2 years later, on the 9th of October 2006, HMS Sandown was sold to the Estonian Navy. After a refit at Rosyth, the Estonians took delivery in April 2007. The Sandown's name was changed to the EML Admiral Cowan, pennant number M313. The name comes from Admiral Sir Walter Henry Cowan, who led the British naval forces in the Baltic, providing naval support to Estonia during the Estonian War of Independence of 1918. The original ship's bell was removed when the Sandown was sold and now stands proudly centre stage in the Broadway Centre entrance.
Sadly, we no longer have a ship named after the town of Sandown, but who's to say there won't be a number 4 in the future? For now, let's stop and remember the previous 3 Sandowns and their crews who served in these ships, whether it's protecting our waters in World War I, bringing the troops back home in World War II, safeguarding the shores of today's United Kingdom, or peacefully ferrying holidaymakers back and forth to our fair isle. But it's those brave souls that fought on the 6th of June 1944 that we can all be proud of, and the part each has played in protecting the freedoms we so often take for granted today. We must never forget them.
I stand here now amongst brave men with whom I stood before, the last time when we landed on June 6th of 44. Back then we were all young men, 18 or little more, their lives cut short that morning on this distant windswept shore. I stand here now and wonder, what would they have become? Had they survived that morning, their lives allowed full run? One thing I know for certain, of which there is no doubt, these brave young men, my pals from then, would be old white hair with wrinkled brow, just like me as I stand here now.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. When you go home, tell them of us, and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today.